Some of the earliest and most proficient practitioners of branding were the producers of patent medicines, often dubious tonics and elixirs purporting to have enormous curative powers. One brand in particular stands out as a triumph of advertising: Lydia Pinkham's Vegetable Compound, launched in 1875.
Lydia Pinkham had started by brewing a folk remedy on her stove for female complaints, and it was a mixture of roots and herbs and alcohol.
The concoction was branded with Lydia's matronly image, an image the public trusted. This trust sold enormous amounts of the vegetable compound. At one point, Pinkham's sons decided that with all their success, they no longer needed to advertise.
But when they stopped advertising, their sales automatically dropped also. When they returned to advertising, their sales dramatically went up. And this was the first widely publicized advertising success story that made the connection is the more you advertise, the more you sell.
Convinced of advertising's power, manufacturers of more benign products decided to jump on the branding bandwagon.
By the late 19th century, manufacturers were figuring out ways to convert generic products into packaged, labeled, and branded goods. One of the classic examples of this was the Uneeda biscuit that the National Biscuit Company pioneered in the late 1890s.
The National Biscuit Company, the forerunner of Nabisco, turned to the N.W. Ayer & Son agency for expert advice on selling its new cracker to the public. Founded in 1869 by Francis Wayland Ayer, the agency initially just placed ads. But Ayer realized agencies needed to prepare the ads, not just place them. He is credited with starting the first full-service ad agency, writing copy and producing illustrations. To sell the new cracker, the agency employed many tricks of the advertising trade. A memorable name, Uneeda Biscuit, a humanizing icon, the Slicker Boy, which highlighted the special watertight packaging, and finally a catchy slogan, "Do you know Uneeda Biscuit?"
And that led to what's probably the first $1 million advertising campaign to popularize that brand.
The Uneeda brand became so popular that in 1900 the company was selling 10 million packages a month. By the end of the century, advertisers were leading the charge in creating the words and images that would sell everything from cereal to cameras to cars. In short, the American dream. One technique, popularized by copywriter Claude Hopkins, was to give consumers a reason why to buy the product.
Claude Hopkins sold Schlitz beer by advertising not the taste, but that Schlitz steam cleaned the bottles. Everybody else steam cleaned the bottles, but when Schlitz said it, people believed that only Schlitz did it. It's called reason why advertising.
Advertising agencies used their new tools not only to sell popular items, but also to create a need for products.
Advertising is manipulation, especially when it started. People really believed the claims. They believed the language. A lot of advertising was aimed at an immigrant class that was just coming to the United States and really wanted to learn how to fit in and how to be classy, and they took it very seriously.
Advertisers created the need to be clean as a way to get ahead in life and earn respect.
Nothing is more interesting from an advertising historian's point of view than the colonizing of the body. Every orifice in the body has been taken over by commercial interests. 100 years ago, people would bathe once a week. They must have stunk. Yet advertising was able to sell the idea that germs would exist where dirtiness was. So to a great degree, a lot of what we take as being the natural rhythms of being clean is a result of advertisers.
Advertisers convinced the public that every body part needed its own branded product to combat dirt and, even worse, odor.
Most people don't think a lot about soap. So you first have to invent the disease and then invent the cure for the disease, which was what BO was.
According to advertisers, the nefarious, though rarely terminal, disease of BO had many culprits, chief among them underarm odor. Odor Oh No, the first nationally advertised deodorant, faced the problem of mentioning the unmentionable for polite society. The forbidden word, armpit, was artfully alluded to as within the curve of a woman's arm. Nonetheless, the campaign still shocked consumers.
This ad ran in the Ladies' Home Journal, and it so insulted some 200-some readers that they canceled their subscriptions. Yet in the same year, the sales of Odor Oh No went up 112%.
With results like these, advertisements for hygiene products continued to play on people's fears of being outcast or ostracized.
Listerine mouthwash invented the disease of halitosis and then provided the cure right there in the bottle. Advertisements frequently would suggest that not only would you spoil an afternoon or an evening, but that your entire life would be ruined. You wouldn't get the job, you wouldn't get the girl, and your life would go down the drain.
By offering solutions to our age-old problems, while cunningly creating brand new ones to worry about, advertising evolved from simple announcements to stunningly provocative pitches, and had grown into a potent force in society by the early 20th century. When we return, advertising conquers the great outdoors with an array of promotional devices. Sell and Spin, a history of advertising, will continue here on the History Channel. We now return to Sell and Spin, a history of advertising, here on the History Channel. From teeming urban streets to pastoral country lanes, advertising is never farther away than the next landmark. And sometimes the next landmark is advertising.
The Hollywood sign originally said Hollywood Land and was a sign of a building developer, and they happened to call it Hollywood Land. The sign was put up there, the tracts were sold. Over time, the land at the end fell down, and we ended up with Hollywood. But it was really originally a real estate developer sign.
The name of the game in outdoor advertising is grabbing attention. And to do this, bigger really is better.
Think about it. You're in your car, fixing your hair, doing the radio, trying to dial honk honk out of my way. And through all of that, we've got to get your attention. And if we don't, immediately, you're doing something else. A poster should be to the eye what a shout is to the ear. It's exclamation, not explanation.
The undisputed master of these shouts and exclamations was P.T. Barnum, considered by many the father of advertising.
Barnum and Bailey would come to town, and before they got there, they'd slap up a bunch of posters and say, "Hey, we're here."
A man who understood that before you sell a product, you have to gather a crowd. And people like Calvin Klein or Benetton or all these people now who are running their fingers down the blackboard of culture to gather a crowd all have P.T. Barnum as the great poobah. He knew how to get people to stop what they're doing and pay attention.
In their efforts to attract a crowd and sell a product, advertisers have long papered, pasted, and painted their messages on anything that didn't move. From city buildings to rural barns, the quintessential structure of the American countryside. Soon after the beginning of the 20th century, advertisers set their sights higher, much higher. Always ready to adapt new technologies to sell their product, advertisers used the airplane to transform the wild blue yonder into just another advertising medium.
When you do an aerial ad, it's dominantly and dramatically alone in the sky. It's not surrounded by hundreds of other ads. No matter how high-tech we get, people are still fascinated by things that fly.
In 1911, Cal Rogers set out to hopscotch across the country in a newfangled flying machine.
They did a coast-to-coast flight from the East Coast to the West Coast, and in order to sponsor it, a fizzy grape drink called Vin Fizz was painted underneath the wings of the plane.
Vin Fizz plastered its name wherever it might be visible. But in these early days of aerial advertising, the message was most visible after one of the plane's less-than-picture-perfect landings. Hoping to devise a more efficient way to advertise, aviators continued to experiment with gimmicks, like writing in the sky.
Skywriting came about as a result of World War I fighter pilots seeing planes leaving trails of smoke as they sort of spiraled down as their enemy went down in flames.
In 1921, Major John Savage of the British Royal Air Force invented the system used for skywriting. Vapor trails were created by injecting a wax into the plane's exhaust. Pilots flew in the shape of letters, forming a message in the sky. Within a year, Savage and his skywriting machines traveled across the Atlantic to conquer the skies of America.
Pepsi-Cola effectively built their empire with skywriting as their primary advertising medium. From 1939 to about 1953, they used skywriting across America.
Another mainstay of aerial advertising has been the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. Their first blimp went aloft in 1925, and the company's airships continue to float in the sky.
A lot of outdoor advertising has as its purpose what we call reinforcement, or reminder. There's not enough time to really tell you what the product is about, why you should buy it. What the sign really does is remind you that the product is there.
Airplanes and blimps were a boon to advertisers, but people had to look up to see the message. And with the rise of the automobile, people were spending more and more time with their eyes firmly focused on the road ahead of them.
Early on, the only way you could get that audience, because we still didn't have radio in cars then, was to put signs out that people would pass as they went by in their cars. And so that as the car became a common consumer product, roadside advertising developed alongside it.
In 1926, roadside advertising staked its first landmark, courtesy of Burma Shave. The billboards were the brainchild of Allen Odell, son of Clinton Odell, inventor of the brushless shaving cream. Despite expert advice that the signs wouldn't work, the cash-strapped company spent $200 installing the first set of signs to introduce the new product.
It wasn't simply one billboard. It was a campaign that involved multiple billboards that would recite a poem.
These humorous signposts relied on creating a sense of expectation in the passing motorist, building up to a punchline that always emphasized the benefits of a close shave. The humor and novelty of these signs caught the fancy of the American public, turning attention to Burma Shave. Its sales quickly shot up, starting a decades-long trend in the company's fortunes. Eventually, the signs appeared in 45 states and as far away as Antarctica.
These became very prominent in the late 20s, early 30s, and continued even into the 40s and 50s as sort of icons of American highways.
But by the 1960s, highway travel was too fast to be able to read small signs. The Burma Shave campaign ended in 1963 after posting more than 500 rhymes.
People continue to cite the Burma Shave ads as an example of how to do outdoor advertising well.
Long before Burma Shave's witty rhymes delighted the buying public, advertisers harnessed the power of electricity to transform billboards into eye-catching spectaculars.
We take lighted signs for granted today, But in the 1880s, a lighted sign was really quite unusual, so the mere fact that it was lighted would draw attention to it.
Ground zero for this explosion of light was New York City's magical main street, Broadway. From Herald Square in the south up to Longacre Square at 42nd Street, the lighted signs of Broadway earned it its nickname, the Great White Way. In 1904, with the construction of the New York Times headquarters, Longacre Square became Times Square, a nexus of streets that would become the canvas for a new kind of outdoor advertising. The original lamplighter of Broadway was O.J. Goode. A native New Yorker, Goode apprenticed in the city's nascent billboard industry and hung out his own shingle in 1889. Noted for the artistic pride he took in his work, Times Square was resplendent with Goode's signature creations, many making use of colored light bulbs. Included among his masterpieces was a 1912 sign for Corticelli Spool Silk. The enormous billboard featured a 24-foot-long kitten playing with the sewing thread.
Size matters because it's bigger than anything else, so you will look at it first, but it's got to be evocative. Let's put it this way. If it's a really big one and it's terrible, it'll just be a really big, terrible ad. It won't make it any better.
Neon arrived on the advertising scene in the 1920s, adding an evocative dose of razzle to the dazzle of lighted signs. Flexible tubes in an array of vibrant colors infused billboards with an extra dimension of personality. The colorful gas was used across the country to sell everything from Studebakers to baked goods. Naturally, Times Square was the epicenter of this new advertising medium, turning it into an art form. The talk of the town was the Wrigley's billboard, erected in 1936. Called a skyscraper of color, the enchanting sign towered 8 stories high. Taking outdoor advertising forward another step was legendary idea man Douglas Lee. He moved to New York in 1931 from his native Alabama with big ideas about big signs. A man with a natural flair for selling, the charismatic Lee convinced many companies that a simple billboard was simply not good enough. One of his early marvels was the Camel Cigarettes billboard. Unveiled in 1941, the sign became a mainstay in Times Square, blowing 10-foot wide smoke rings every 4 seconds.
One way you might get people's attention is to have the sign do something unusual. So perhaps you have a sign that blows smoke. That really grabs people's attention, causes people to talk to one another about the sign and ultimately about the product.
Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Times Square continued to be the location of mesmerizing billboards, including the memorable neon sign for Coca-Cola. By the 1970s, however, Times Square became better known for selling sex than soda pop. For the next 20 years, it lost its luster with mainstream advertisers. Recent efforts, however, to make it safer and restore it as an advertising mecca have made Times Square a destination for more than 20 million tourists a year.